The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the small town of Ridgeville, where life seemed to move at its own slow and steady pace. On most days, the air carried the comforting hum of routine, shopkeepers chatting with their regulars, kids racing on their bikes, and the occasional whistle of the train cutting through the stillness. But that day was different. The peaceful rhythm of Ridgeville was shattered by an act so shocking, so unfathomable, that it would leave everyone who heard about it speechless. It all began when a young woman named Maya Johnson stepped out of her modest apartment. Maya was 7 months pregnant and glowing despite the challenges she faced as a single mother-to-be. She was kind, quiet, and determined, qualities that had helped her endure a world that often felt indifferent to her struggles. Maya had spent the morning running errands, her baby bump slowing her down but never stopping her. She was just another face in the crowd, someone you might pass by without noticing, but her story was about to become unforgettable. As Maya made her way home, a police car pulled up beside her. 2 officers, both wearing uniforms that radiated authority, stepped out. Their faces were stern, their body language rigid. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't done anything wrong, at least, not that she knew of, but the sight of those badges filled her with a sense of unease. "Ma'am, we need to talk to you," one of the officers said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Maya hesitated, clutching her belly protectively. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. What followed was a series of events so surreal, so utterly out of the ordinary, that even Maya struggled to comprehend what was happening. The officers didn't answer her question. Instead, they exchanged a glance, a silent communication that made her stomach churn. Before she could ask anything else, they grabbed her arms. "Wait, what's going on?" Maya cried out, panic lacing her voice. But her protests fell on deaf ears. In a matter of minutes, Maya found herself handcuffed, her freedom stripped away without explanation. The officers led her to their car, their grip firm and unyielding. People on the street stopped and stared, some pulling out their phones to record the scene, but no one dared to intervene. Maya pleaded for answers, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, I'm pregnant. I don't understand what's happening." Still, the officers said nothing. The air inside the car was thick with tension as they drove her to a location that wasn't the police station or anywhere Maya recognized. Her mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? What could she have possibly done to warrant such treatment? The car eventually stopped near an old, abandoned train yard on the outskirts of town. The officers dragged Maya out, their expressions cold and detached. Maya's legs wobbled beneath her, but she forced herself to stay upright, her maternal instincts screaming at her to protect her unborn child. And then it happened, the moment that would haunt Maya for the rest of her life. The officers tied her hands and feet, securing her to the cold, unforgiving train tracks that cut through the desolate yard. "Please, you don't have to do this," she bade, tears streaming down her face. Her voice echoed in the emptiness, a sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. The officers stepped back, their faces unreadable. One of them glanced at his watch, then at the horizon. In the distance, the faint rumble of a train began to grow louder. "Good luck," one of them muttered before turning away, leaving Maya alone on the tracks. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled against the ropes, her mind racing with thoughts of her baby. She screamed, hoping someone, anyone, would hear her. The sound of the approaching train grew deafening, each second dragging her closer to what felt like the end. But then, just as the train came into view, something unexpected happened. The train's horn blasted through the empty expanse, a chilling reminder of the danger hurtling toward Maya. Her heart pounded against her ribs as her hands twisted and strained against the rough ropes binding her wrists. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to escape, but her body was trembling with exhaustion, her strength no match for the tight knots. The tracks beneath her seemed to hum with anticipation, vibrating with the force of the approaching train. Maya turned her head frantically, scanning the area for any sign of help, but the desolate yard was eerily quiet. The officers had vanished, leaving behind only the faint sound of their car speeding off in the distance. Tears blurred her vision as she gasped for air, struggling to think through the suffocating fear. Why had this happened? Why her? She was just an ordinary woman trying to get by, doing everything she could to prepare for her baby's arrival. Her mind raced back to earlier that day, replaying every moment in search of an answer, but nothing made sense. Maya grew up in Ridgeville, a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Life wasn't easy, but she'd always done her best to stay out of trouble. After her parents passed away when she was in her early 20s, she took on 2 jobs to make ends meet. She never imagined she'd be raising a child on her own, but when her boyfriend Derek walked out after learning about the pregnancy, she didn't have much choice. Still, she never let her hardships define her. Maya was known for her resilience, her quiet strength, and the way she always seemed to find a reason to smile, even on the toughest days. She was the kind of person who would stop to help a stranger, who always made sure her elderly neighbor had groceries, who gave what little she could to anyone in need. But now, as she lay helpless on the cold steel tracks, it felt like the world had turned its back on her. The roar of the train grew louder, a relentless reminder that time was slipping away. Maya bit down on her lip to stifle a sob, refusing to give in to despair. There had to be a way out. She couldn't give up, not for herself and certainly not for the life growing inside her. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and for a moment, hope surged through her chest. She strained her neck to see, desperate to confirm she wasn't imagining things. In the distance, a shadow emerged, blurry and indistinct against the setting sun. "Help!" Maya screamed, her voice cracking as she called out again and again. "Please, I'm over here." The figure hesitated, then started moving toward her. As they got closer, Maya's hope wavered. The figure wasn't in uniform, and they didn't appear to be someone she recognized. Dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans, they seemed cautious, almost wary as they approached. "What happened to you?" The stranger called out, their voice carrying a mix of concern and hesitation. I was tied up," Maya stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The cops, they left me here. Please, you have to help me." The stranger's steps quickened as they closed the gap, their expression sharpening with alarm when they saw her predicament. Without another word, they knelt beside her, fumbling with the ropes around her wrists. "Who did this to you?" they asked, their hands working quickly but clumsily. Maya shook her head, her breath hitching. "I don't know why. They didn't tell me anything. They just grabbed me and brought me here." The stranger glanced over their shoulder, their body tensing as the train's rumble grew deafening. "We don't have much time. Hang on." As the stranger struggled to untie the knots, Maya studied their face, trying to read their intentions. They seemed young, maybe in their early 20s, with sharp features and eyes that darted nervously between her and the approaching train. There was something about their demeanor, something that made Maya wonder if they were running from something too. Finally, the ropes around her wrists came loose. Maya let out a shaky breath of relief as the stranger moved to her ankles, their hands trembling slightly as they worked. The train was dangerously close now, its horn blaring like a final warning. Come on," the stranger muttered under their breath, that urgency mirroring Maya's pounding heartbeat. With one last tug, the ropes fell away and Maya was free. The stranger grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet, both of them stumbling as they scrambled off the tracks. Just as they reached the edge, the train thundered past, the force of its speed whipping their hair and clothes. Maya collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. The stranger sat beside her, their own breathing ragged. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the adrenaline coursing through their veins, leaving them both shaken and silent. "Thank you," Maya finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the lingering roar of the train. "I don't know how to repay you." The strangers shook their head, brushing off her gratitude. "You don't have to. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Maya nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "I think I'm okay. Just scared." The stranger studied her for a moment, their eyes narrowing as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "You said the cops did this to you?" Maya nodded again, her throat tightening. "Yes, 2 officers. I didn't recognize them. They didn't even tell me why." The stranger's expression darkened, their jaw clenching as they looked away. "That's not right," they muttered, their voice laced with anger. "That's not how it's supposed to be." Maya frowned, a new wave of unease washing over her. "Why were you here?" she asked cautiously, her voice tinged with suspicion. The stranger hesitated, their gaze shifting to the ground. I was just passing through. I didn't think I'd find someone like this." Something about their tone made Maya wonder if there was more to their story, but she didn't press. Her priority was getting somewhere safe, away from the tracks and the lingering threat of those officers. "We need to go," the stranger said, standing up and offering her a hand. "If they come back and see you're gone." Maya swallowed hard, her mind racing with possibilities. Who were those officers? What had driven them to such a cruel act? And now, who was the stranger? This person who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life? As they walked away from the tracks, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her nightmare was far from over. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something even more terrifying, a mystery that was growing darker with every passing moment. As Maya and the stranger moved farther from the tracks, the weight of what had just happened began to settle over her. Every step felt heavier than the last, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. She glanced over at the stranger, who was walking a few paces ahead, their shoulders tense and their eyes scanning the area as though expecting trouble. "Where are we going?" Maya finally asked, her voice low but firm. "Somewhere safe," the stranger replied without looking back. "Safe?" she repeated, skepticism creeping into her tone. "I don't even know your name. How do I know I can trust you?" The stranger hesitated, slowing their pace. They turned to face her, their expression a mixture of concern and something unspoken. "Maybe guilt, maybe fear. You don't have to trust me," they said after a moment. "But staying here isn't an option. You saw what those cops did. Do you really want to stick around and find out what happens next?" Maya didn't respond right away. She hated the feeling of being so vulnerable, so dependent on someone she didn't know. But the truth was, she didn't have many options. Whoever this person was, they had saved her life, and for now, that was enough. "I'm Maya," she said softly, hoping to bridge the gap of distrust between them. "Chris," the stranger replied. "Let's keep moving." The two of them walked in silence, the sun dipping lower on the horizon and casting long shadows across the landscape. Maya's legs ached and her back throbbed from the strain of the ropes. She was painfully aware of every step, every sound around them, her body on high alert. As they approached the edge of the train yard, Chris suddenly stopped and gestured for her to do the same. They crouched behind a rusted metal container, peering out cautiously. "There's a gas station up ahead," Chris whispered. "We'll stop there and figure out our next move." Maya nodded, her throat dry. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until that moment, and the thought of a cold drink was almost enough to push her fear aside. The gas station was small and dimly lit, the kind of place that felt like a relic from another time. Chris led the way inside, their movements careful and deliberate. The clerk, an older man with a weathered face, barely glanced up as they entered. Maya hovered near the door, her nerves on edge. Chris grabbed a bottle of water and a granola bar from the shelves, then motioned for her to do the same. She hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt for taking anything without money, but Chris waved her off. "Just take it," they muttered under their breath. The clerk finally looked up as they approached the counter. His eyes lingered on Maya for a moment, and she felt her stomach tighten. Did he recognize her? Had he seen the footage of her arrest? "Long day?" the clerk asked, his tone casual but curious. "Something like that," Chris replied quickly, sliding a crumpled bill across the counter. "Keep the change." The clerk shrugged, ringing up the items without further comment. Maya felt a small rush of relief as they left the station and stepped back into the cool evening air. Chris handed her the water and granola bar, and she accepted them gratefully. As they walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see the police car from earlier creeping up behind them. "Do you think they're looking for me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. Chris frowned, their expression grim. "Probably. If they went to all that trouble, they're not just going to let you walk away." Maya swallowed hard, the weight of their words sinking in. "But why? I don't understand any of this. I've never even had so much as a parking ticket." Chris didn't answer right away. They seemed lost in thought, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Finally, they spoke, their voice low. "Sometimes it's not about what you did. It's about what you know, or what someone thinks you know." Maya stared at them, her mind spinning. "What are you talking about?" Chris hesitated, then shook their head. "Never mind. Just stick with me, okay? I'll get you out of this." The ambiguity of their answer only fueled Maya's anxiety. What weren't they telling her? And why did it feel like Chris knew more than they were letting on? As they continued walking, the distant sound of sirens pierced the air, faint but unmistakable. Maya froze, her heart racing. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chris grabbed her hand, their grip firm. "Come on, we need to move." They broke into a run, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Maya's lungs burned, and her legs felt like they could give out at any moment, but she forced herself to keep going. The sirens grew louder, their wailing a constant reminder of the danger closing in. Chris led her down a narrow alley, their movements quick and purposeful. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, and Maya could only hope they had a plan. Finally, they stopped outside a run-down building with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. Chris pushed open the door, revealing a dark interior that smelled of damp and mildew. "This way," they said, guiding her inside. Maya hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But the sound of the sirens made the decision for her. She followed Chris into the darkness, her heart pounding as they climbed a set of creaky stairs. The room they entered was small and sparsely furnished, with a single mattress on the floor and a battered wooden chair in the corner. Chris locked the door behind them and pulled the blinds closed, plunging the room into near total darkness. "We'll stay here for now," they said, their voice calm but firm. Maya sank onto the mattress, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "Chris, what's going on? Who are you really?" Chris sat down in the chair, their expression unreadable. "Let's just say I've been where you are," they replied cryptically. "And if we're going to survive this, we need to stick together." Maya stared at them, her mind swelling with questions. Who was Chris? What had they been through? And most importantly, why had she been targeted? As the sirens faded into the distance, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the answers to her questions were closer than she realized and far more dangerous than she could imagine.